Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial, starts right now.
Only a few witnesses, but a lot of evidence on display today. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Glenn Jones.
I'm J.C. Monahan. The prosecution presented everything from shards of apparent plastic believed to be from Karen Reed's taillight, and later surveillance video outlining the number of drinks Reed may have had before getting behind the wheel of her SUV.
The day got off to a slow start with two forensic scientists on the stand, but things picked up when a high-ranking state police trooper was called to testify. For those keeping count, that's just 3 witnesses today. We're halfway through week 6, and the prosecution still has about 30 names left on the witness list.
So before we dive into the details, let's get a recap of what was presented in court today. Our Kirsten Glavin live in Dedham. Kirsten.
Yeah, a lot of the focus today was on Karen Reed's taillight, specifically how and when it was damaged. Now, the state has been making the argument that Reed allegedly hit John O'Keefe with her SUV. I asked Reed directly about that after court today. Massachusetts State Police Trooper Yuri Buchenik taking the stand Wednesday, testifying to his investigation as the on-duty supervisor when John O'Keefe died.
After viewing Mr. O'Keefe's body, we proceeded to identify the clothing items and bag them into evidence bags.
The jury shown evidence bags filled with O'Keefe's clothing.
It's the right sneaker recovered from the hospital room.
Along with graphic autopsy images of O'Keefe, prompting an emotional response in the courtroom.
You don't have access to that evidence room, is that correct?
That's correct.
Was Trooper Proctor, is he one of those evidence officers? Did he have access to that room?
He does not.
Buchenik also describing his first interview with Karen Reed that morning in January.
She was asked if she saw Mr. O'Keefe walk into the home at 34 Fairview, and she stated she did not. She stated that she made a 3-point turn after dropping him off and left.
He adds Reed was then notified her SUV and cell phone would be seized.
She was asked if she knew how she found out about the damage to her vehicle, to which she stated, quote, "I don't know, it happened last night."
This video showing Reed backing up into O'Keefe's car, then driving off. Reed's defense team has pointed to this incident causing the taillight damage. Another surveillance video capturing Reed and her father later looking at it.
So I observed the defendant and her father at the rear right taillight gesturing or signaling towards the affected, damaged, and missing parts of the taillight.
Objection.
This Sallyport video from the Canton Police Department showing Reed's SUV stored and taped off.
We're establishing a perimeter around the vehicle.
Her vehicle then later transported to Milton.
The Canton Police Department had recused themselves from interviews and in that portion of the investigation.
Outside of court, we asked Reed about her taillight.
Karen, how did the taillight get damaged? You saw it. I backed up into John's car.
Her father saying the same.
But it makes contact with the O'Keefe vehicle, and you'll see his left rear wheel jetson forward, then return to its previous position. And that's how I believe my daughter's taillight got cracked.
Sergeant Buchenik ended his testimony today describing how many drinks that Karen Reed had the night before O'Keefe died while the group was bar hopping. Now, he counted and showed receipts for 7 drinks at McCarthy's alone. That was before the group then made it over to Waterfall. And I do want to point out that is a very different picture than what was painted earlier in this trial when we heard from some of those witnesses who were in the group bar hopping that evening, painting, again, just a very different story in terms of a level of intoxication there. JC, Glenn?
Kirsten, thank you. Joining us here in studio tonight is Sue O'Connell, our courtroom insider and commentator, and perfect for a day like today to explain, Sue, how the jury took in a lot of the information. We just heard there was a lot of evidence but it was minutia, long. How is the jury holding up?
Yeah, the technical information this morning was a lot. And even for those of us who can use our phones and write things down and get to bring our notes back with us, which the jury can't, it was very confusing to try and keep track of. And I have a couple of jurors that I keep an eye on. There's 3 or 4 of them that love the technical testimony. They were leaning in and interested, but there were kind of ebbs and flows. We had 2 very soft-spoken scientists scientists who were talking, very careful about what they're saying, taking their time. So that didn't give any momentum to either Lally or to Alan Jackson. So it was hard.
Dry. It was dry. It was a lot of numbers. Here's evidence 465-4, that type of thing.
But after the scientists were done, we had a trooper up there who was very engaging. At one moment, he took pieces of evidence, John O'Keefe's clothing, out of a bag to show it to the jury. We've seen pictures of that evidence before, but it felt different to see it in person. How did it read in the room?
Yeah, it was very somber. I mean, I think it's safe to say that the jury was looking at it, understanding that not only were these the last clothes that John O'Keefe had on, but also you can see the stains, which we're assuming are blood. You can also see how the paramedics cut his clothing off him in order to try and save his life, which obviously did not happen. So it was very somber. It was pretty heavy. I was, as we're behind the O'Keefe family in the press booth, but I was able to go to the edge of the booth a little bit and to look over, and I could see that his brother Paul and his sister-in-law Erin just very tight. The whole family. It's terrible. And the jury also was very somber and reacting. And one way I can tell is that usually when there's a sidebar, they all kind of pop up without even the judge telling them. They sat there during a sidebar during this.
They also showed, which we didn't see, but you saw it in the courtroom, a photo of John's body afterwards and talked about the injuries. Did the O'Keefe stay for that? Were they in the courtroom?
They were. I know that Mrs. O'Keefe, John O'Keefe's mother, at one point was taken out, and so she was obviously moved very visibly by this. And then when we came back from a break or from lunch, I forget which, the prosecution team went over and said you might want to leave again for this so that she didn't have to experience this. But again, remembering John O'Keefe's tragic death is center to what's happening here, and this was just a grim reminder that he was a person who died.
People at home, Glenn, are noticing behavior that they do see on camera. Do you want to read Carol's comment we got from one of our viewers?
Yeah, here it is. It says, guilty or not guilty, I think it is so disrespectful for Karen and her attorney Jackson to laugh during breaks. From what I have seen, she has shown no emotion, but can find a chance to laugh and smile. John's mom is sitting so close to her, and I feel it's awful for them to laugh in front of her.
Again, that's a viewer question, but this goes to people are looking at behavior, but you're in there.
Yeah, I'm in there. And, the Karen Reed and defense team are living in a very different world than the O'Keefes are living in. And again, remember, we're in this tiny, tiny, tiny courtroom, so we're all sitting up on top of each other. And Karen is not, I think, displaying emotion that some people might think, considering that John was her boyfriend, and regardless of what you think, he is dead and he was killed tragically. So there is a disconnect there. I'm not sure how the jury is reacting to that. They have to see Karen, and be right behind her is the O'Keefe family.
Sure. Sue O'Connell, as always, thank you. If you have a question, by the way, for one of our experts, send us an email at canton.confidential@nbcuni.com.
All right, still to come here tonight, we're breaking down this morning's testimony on the pieces of taillight submitted as evidence. Stay with us. You're watching Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial.
This morning's testimony got off to a slow and somewhat confusing start. Assistant DA Adam Lally spent about 45 minutes asking a forensic scientist to go over nearly every piece of shattered taillight submitted to the Mass State Crime Lab.
And altogether, it was a lot of evidence to think about and sort through, making it easy to get lost in the details. So let's clear things up a bit. According to Ashley Valier's testimony, there were several bags of evidence submitted to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab on March 14th, all with different collection dates. One of the evidence bags shows the contents were collected on February 3rd, 5 days after John O'Keefe's death, by Trooper DeSicco. You can see the pieces of plastic here vary in size. On February 8th, this larger piece of plastic was among the evidence collected, this time by Trooper Proctor. Then on February 11th, nearly 2 weeks after the incident, Trooper Proctor allegedly collected more evidence, including this chunk of plastic. And finally, on February 18th, Proctor once again found several more pieces believed to be part of Reed's passenger side taillight. Joining me now to help us decipher through the evidence that we heard about today is Michael Coyne, NBC 10 Boston legal analyst. All right, Michael, I guess I just want to ask you first about the physical and forensic evidence that we heard today. What is sticking out to you as important for helping the prosecution prove its case?
I think what's most important is the testimony of the trooper who lent some gravitas, finally, I think, to the government's case. The problem with this case, with every one of the witnesses that we've seen, is that the evidence collection, the manner in which the evidence was maintained and collected, and the process itself is likely so badly tainted that I think it puts the government at a real disadvantage, and it aids the defendant in trying to create that reasonable doubt.
So you're talking about a sense of professionalism that perhaps we haven't seen from the other law enforcement testimony.
No, I think that's correct. I think if you had started here with the witnesses and the last day again, I think what we might be feeling is a stronger case. We've finally seen some evidence of the extensive drinking that we heard about earlier on. We know she was driving. We know that at some point he met his death that night. And so now we're focusing on what should have been and is the heart of the case with respect to the vehicular manslaughter charge, is the drinking, the driving, and the deadly consequences. And that's what really the government needs to focus on. The problem is the evidence collection was so haphazard that it's tainted all of it and given the defendant a strong avenue for cross-examination, which we're going to see in very short order with the last witness.
Michael, a name we hear often is Trooper Michael Proctor, but we haven't seen him on the stand. I just want to ask you, from your perspective, how frequently is it that we see a lead investigator take the stand in a murder trial like this one? At one point, Trooper Proctor was the lead investigator in this case. And if he's called by the prosecution in this case, he's on the witness list, do you think he's a liability to their case?
I think he is a liability at this point, and that was the defendant's game plan throughout. That's why we hear the name so often, and we hear of his involvement in the process and his relationship with a number of the different parties that are involved. I think the government probably doesn't have a choice but to call him because he's been such a focus of so many of the cross-examinations, and it would be highly unusual for the lead investigator not to be called in the case. What they're trying to do is buttress his testimony ultimately with all of these other witnesses who were there, who helped assist, who were really part of the investigation in a principled way. That's why we heard the witness testify all day today, who gave his qualifications, which were extensive, and really supported the government's case from beginning to end here with respect to the key figures, the drinking, the driving, the deadly consequences, and the forensics with respect to the vehicle itself. We're still going to question, everyone's going to question where all these plastic pieces came from and why all of a sudden we have them, because a number of us still look at the photos and say, well, it's not cracked that badly. So how do we have all of these things that come to light later? I think the defendant is going to have a good cross-examination on the trooper, but the trooper did a reasonable job today, and ultimately it's up to the jury as to which version of these events they're going to believe. We may think that this looks like a not guilty verdict, but juries can fool us, and juries can see a different case than what many of us see.
All right, Michael Coyne on the physical evidence today. Thank you. When we come back, we're focusing on testimony from Trooper Buchnick, what he had to say on the stand today, and those questions coming to light about protocol. We're back after this.
We are joined tonight by Todd McGee, security and law enforcement expert, as well as a retired Massachusetts State Trooper. Todd, thanks for being with us. There seems to be, there are a lot of questions about this broken taillight. I don't know that anybody's ever talked about a broken taillight as much as we have over the last 6 weeks, especially today. From your vantage point, what is the protocol when it comes to taking photos of evidence? Specifically in this case, should the taillight have been photographed before it was towed to the police department, therefore taking all of this out that it possibly was broken afterwards?
Well, JC, let's start with the beginning part of the case, where establishing a crime scene should have been the first and foremost part of Canton PD's job. So we all understand that it was inclement weather. It was very difficult to be able to process anything based on the weather conditions. That being said, slow everything down, identify the property boundaries, identify the body of where John O'Keefe was at, and from there you can establish a crime scene. Now we have to remember that John O'Keefe hadn't passed at that first discovery of his body. So he was transported. They tried to revive him. So there was a delay in the state police for a number of reasons, but there was a delay in the state police involvement coming out to the house as a crime scene. That being said, the testimony by the lieutenant in charge of the CERT team on Monday, I believe it was this week, he said that it was such a condensed area that the CERT team stood shoulder to shoulder to search that area. What I find very peculiar is that, first of all, if you need a search team, you want the state police CERT team. They're experts at it. They're the best in the business. So the fact that evidence was found days after is problematic, because you had probably a couple of dozen sets of eyes and ears all in a concentrated area that were able to sweep that area and identify the different pieces that were entered into evidence in the form of the tail lens. So the collection of evidence here, definitely a problematic area. To your earlier point about documentation and then submitting that information to the crime lab, that's all standard protocols, from photos to collection to tagging to transportation to the crime lab. That establishes your chain of custody.
And for that, from your point of view, do you feel, at least from this point, because today we really began with getting Karen Reed's SUV from Dighton at the home of her parents to Canton to the Sallyport. We heard a lot about the Sallyport and the video from the Sallyport. Does that track for you in terms of how this should have been handled? Because the car was in the Sallyport until Canton police recused themselves from the case.
So again, another part of the timeline here, we really need to establish the timeline in order to recognize if that part of the case was handled correctly. What was brought out in court was that vehicle went approximately 60 miles round trip. Part of it, there was snowstorm, and there was a hair that was discovered on the bumper. So again, just another peculiar part of this investigation as it's being brought out in the court with Attorney Jackson and Attorney Yannetti and the state's prosecutors.
Todd McGee, security and law enforcement expert, thanks for your insight. We're going to tap you multiple times to come back, please, over the course of what's turning out to be a very long trial. Todd, thank you. Up next, another sidebar that got a big, unexpected reaction from the defense team. You won't want to miss this.
We're back in studio now with Sue O'Connell, our courtroom insider and commentator, and ferocious poster on X.
Yes. If you have been following Sue on X, she did a lot this afternoon about what happened. It's basically a play-by-play, take a look, of the sidebar mid-afternoon. She's telling the Sallyport video is being shown without the jury in the room. Then she says Karen Reed had a major reaction to something Buchanan said. She gets animated. There's another break. As you're building this, Sue, we're not there. We're like, what is going on? Because when the cameras go back on, everything seems as it was.
Right, and we're just watching this sort of boring Sallyport video of the car, people moving snow, and the defense table is vibrating and being happy and can't stop talking to each other. And then there's the sidebar, and we watch the video. It wasn't about what Buchanan said. It was about the video.
Okay.
This is what
we're seeing.
Right.
So we're watching this. You know, it's gotten very animated, and they're describing, once the car comes in, they describe what side of the car were you on, who was, so there you can see it coming in. We want to see if we can get through this video so we can get to the part that's relevant here. Something that obviously was noticed when the defense saw this video. Do you want to fast forward through this?
Thank goodness we have a team back here, because we're just looking at it. And we noticed here that the numbers on the wall, the number 4, is actually the police is backwards, and the number 4 is backwards on this video. So that implies that this video is a mirror. It's not set up the way that it should be.
So to be clear, the video that you're seeing is exactly what was shown in court today. The picture that you're seeing right there is what our photographer did, our editor, and flipped it to be the mirror image of what it would look like. So the whole idea is that's an evidence photo. Okay, yes. Wonderful. Thank you. That's an evidence photo. Thank you for clarifying that. The point is, Sue, what do you expect is going to happen if what we're seeing here is in fact happening, which means it was
defense hasn't had a chance yet to cross, and they're going to get up and they're going to ask, is this the video the way it's supposed to be? We'll have to see what Buchanan says tomorrow.
All right, he'll be on the stand tomorrow. The prosecution will then wrap up its first, and then he'll get cross-examined. As always, you can follow every second of this trial as it unfolds live on our website and our YouTube page and on NECN. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 7. Good night.